Mary, Archangel Michael, and all the choir of your saints, hear us when we say thankfully to you, our Father who art in heaven.
Hi, Joseph. I'm singling you out because you're so
proud of you.
Yeah, and we're so happy that you're here.
Yeah.
Hi. Huh? Yes, I will. How's everybody doing? Awesome. And then hack the system. Okay. The level 1 is the longest one. Levels 2 and 3, we're going to speed right through them. We're going to start level 2 today. Okay. There's just a few things left in level 1. We have to prove the existence of God, Mary. It was a lot of work. No, but you will be today. Today you will be a post-level 1 apologist. Okay, let me just figure out where my mouse is. There we go. Slide looks different on my computer than it does on the screen, but it's right on the screen and wrong on my computer, so I guess that's fine. Okay, as Mary has pointed out, level 1 is pretty long. Does anybody want to remind me what we are trying to prove at level 1? Actually, let's take a step back. Apologetics is apologeia in Greek, which is the word for what? Yeah, yes, very good. To give a defense. So at level 1, we're giving a defense of something very specific. Does anybody want to tell me what that is, so I don't have to talk the whole time?
There is a creator.
Yes, very good. Just that, yeah, like that there's a God, right? Like, and we used intelligent design and creation as one of the ways that we proved that, and then we went through historical facts, archaeological facts, we went extensively through the Shroud of Turin. And then this week, the last part of level 1 is really just a philosophical question that we're going to pose both to ourselves and to people who don't believe in God in an effort to get to the idea that God does exist. Again, this is the most complicated level because you're starting from nothing and you don't use any sources from the Bible, which is why we need so much evidence at level 1. So let's go ahead and talk about the philosophical aspect of level 1. And the idea is really just that life without God, or the idea of life without God, is absurd. It really, like, spoiler alert, removes all meaning and purpose from life if there's no God. And we're going to really get into that today. As a note, in the book it says this, and I thought it was really important, because the whole point of apologetics is that eventually, one day, we go out into the world and we have conversations, difficult conversations with people who maybe at level 1 don't believe in God at all. And it's really important that we, 1, pray that God enlightens our heart, that when we talk to these people, we talk to them with love. And I think sometimes, like, yes, we imagine ourselves like, I think the entire time I've been preparing, I imagine myself like in a heated debate with somebody who like doesn't go to church and doesn't believe in God at all. And I'm like, this could be any of the people we serve in our church who are struggling with this question of like, where is God? Or how can this be without this? And so we always want to pray that every single person that we're talking to, we are talking to them with the love that God has for his children. It's also important to note that fighting atheism does not mean that an atheist life has no value. In fact, the whole reason we learn this is because every atheist and every person who walks the face of the earth, their life has so much value to God, right? We don't think that their contribution is minimal because they don't believe in God and they're just doing their own thing. We also don't believe that like any scientific contributions made by atheists are minimal. Some of them are very important, even if we don't agree with them. Like, we're not minimizing what these people are doing, we're saying this is what we believe and how we came to this conclusion. And so, in summary, love is the motivation for apologia, which we said is the Greek word for giving a defense. So let's go into this sort of like four-part situation about why all of this matters, right? Like the philosophical component of this study. So essentially, right, when we do not believe that there is a God, we become cosmic orphans. Like, we are the only creature that asks the question, why? Animals go out there and they do what they need to do and they get the job done, and, you know, they kill each other and they eat each other and they, you know, fight over things, and it's all fine. And our understanding is that we as humans are the only people who stop and constantly ask the question, like, why am I here? Like, why am I on this earth? Whether you believe in God or not, everybody has asked themselves this question. It is something innately built in us that we are looking for. That bleeds into B. I'm skipping ahead of myself. But we're the only creation that questions its existence. Now, because of enlightenment, or like modern human enlightenment, a lot of people have gotten rid of the idea of God. They're like, this just like does not serve me personally, and so I'm just going to remove God from this equation. But it's very hard to do that, because if you're saying there is no God, then all of these things have to be true. You are an accidental byproduct of nature. You are the result of reason and non-eternity. And you are matter plus time plus chance. And there is no reason for your existence. I think there's a typo here where it says you are the result of reason. That's not correct. It should be you are the result of non-eternity, and there's no reason for your existence. And when you do not believe in God, like every atheist believes that like at the end of their life when they die, that's it, right? There are agnostic people who believe there might be something, right? But that's different than atheism. Agnostic people say, I think there's something, I don't know what it is. But we're talking very specifically about people who do not believe in the existence of God at all. So in those situations, it's like, this is it, and then I die, and then I just sort of am gone forever. And so I think that a lot of people don't believe in God because I think it's a little bit freeing at a very surface level, like there is no God for me to answer to, and so I sort of just live my life for me, which sounds awesome. But when you get rid of God, right, like we were talking about in point A, you kind of become orphaned from everything else. You have no like root or foundation that you are built in. And so in an effort to be like less stifled or oppressed, you're really just like separating yourself from God. It's not that God doesn't exist, right? But just that like, I don't think you're there, and so I'm sort of emancipating myself from you. So let's talk about this idea of non-being and this threat of non-being. So if there is no God, and I just want to give a disclaimer before I go into this, because a lot of these slides are just a lot of words. Last week we had beautiful, fun pictures, so please bear with me. It's a lot of, again, philosophical mind stuff. Okay, so if there is no God, man's life is ultimately absurd, and you'll hear this said over and over again in this study. Because if God doesn't exist, and as such there is no afterlife, then man and the universe are all doomed to death, right? Man, like all organisms, must die. There is no immortality, and the grave is the end. It is the final destination. Our lives compared to the universe are an infinitesimal moment, and yet this is all the life we will ever know, right? So if you think about like you in the scope of all of time, it's a drop, right? It's nothing. And so it feels very, very like when you're like, well, there's no God and that's freeing to me. Like that is so much more suffocating to me personally, the idea that I am like a speck on the face of everything, and that I'm going to come and I'm going to go, and then one day all this will be over. And like, spoiler alert, I don't want to jump too far ahead, but even the universe has an end. Like this galaxy and all is scientifically proven that the universe will expand. We'll get to that. I'm getting ahead of myself because I'm getting so excited. But the point is, small speck on this huge, massive timeline. Without God, we are faced with the frightening, staggering threat of not existing. Furthermore, the universe is also facing death. Okay, I was going to skip that far ahead. It's still the same slide. Science tells us that the universe is expanding and galaxies are growing further apart over time. It will grow colder and energy will dissipate, stars will dim, and all matter will collapse. I think both atheists and believers believe in this. Like, this is just like, we know, even now we've seen with climate change, never rained this much in California my entire life. But I think the idea is just that the earth is not designed to last forever. It's not an infinite resource. The entire universe is marching towards inevitable extinction. So again, we're putting ourselves in the shoes of this belief, right? That this is all there is. So if this is true, which for the purpose of this exercise, we'll assume it is. Then, right, we're saying there's no God, and then man and the universe are doomed, and we are all just prisoners awaiting execution. And if there is no God and no immortality, what are the consequences of that? And what we say, or what we mean when we say, like, our lives are completely absurd under these pretenses, is just that there is no ultimate value, there is no ultimate meaning, and there is no ultimate significance to your life. And we'll talk about all of these things in more depth. But without this ultimate meaning, does it matter if you live at all? Like, if you're here and all this ends, and we'll get deeper into this thought, what is the point of anything? Again, a very depressing lesson to prepare, because that really is how all of this, it's a very like circular thought, right? Like, there is nothing, and we go through all of these steps, and the end point is really just like, and I am nothing if there is nothing. So let's talk about this idea of significance, right? We'll first talk about it in terms of relative significance, and then we'll talk about it in terms of ultimate significance. So the idea of relative significance is very simple, right? Like, I have maybe a significant impact on the people around me, right? If me and Monica are friends, right, I have an impact on Monica, and Monica has an impact on me, okay? And maybe major events will happen in both of our lives, and we'll share them, and that will be significant to us. But at the end of the day, if nothing exists outside of this life that I live here on earth, right? One day, me and Monica are going to be gone, right? And so the idea is that that is relative significance. It matters right now. It doesn't matter on a larger scale, because it comes and it goes, okay? So now let's talk about ultimate significance. Oh, thank you for fixing this. So if you believe in the Big Bang, and you suppose that it means, and you suppose it never occurred. Oh, okay, if you believe in the Big Bang and you're like, okay, the Big Bang never happened, like hypothetically. Like, I believe in it, but I'm going through a hypothetical situation where I'm like, okay, like, let me pretend the Big Bang never happened. What ultimate difference would it make? There is no difference. Like, to people who believe in the Big Bang, whether it's real or not is irrelevant. Like, there is no core belief in the Big Bang other than like some people's math and science beliefs, right? But there's nothing driving the Big Bang. There's nothing behind it. There's no meaning in it. It's just sort of like this really cool coincidence, right? And so it makes no difference whether or not it exists, right? And the same applies to humanity, right? Like, if this thing happened and everything came out of nothing, right? Then mankind is doomed to a dying universe. Like, that is its sentence. You were created for nothing, right? And eventually the human race will cease to exist, and it will never matter whether any of us existed, right? And the example that the book uses is very like jarring. It's like, you're all a bunch of mosquitoes, and you come into the world, and then you're gone. Like, people don't count the significance of mosquitoes, right? Like, they come and they die very quickly, and we think about like bugs, and we're like, okay, well, there's a bajillion bugs. Okay, those bugs are doomed to death, right? Like, they don't have a significant, meaningful existence. So by saying that there's no God, right, we are likening ourselves to that kind of existence. This is my beginning and my end, and everything that happens in between doesn't really matter because nobody will remember, and all this kind of goes away. Hi, everybody. For everybody who just joined us, I'll just do a very quick place bookmark for you. Placeholder? No, that's not right. I'm going to just tell you where we are, which is we are talking about level 1, which in apologetics, which is proving the existence of God. And in this section, we are specifically talking about the philosophical belief that God exists, okay? Or the philosophical meaning of life, rather, if God does not exist, more accurately, is what we're studying. So right now we're talking about significance, like, okay. So a good summary for this is from French existentialist Jean-Paul Sartre, and he says, and this man actually does not necessarily believe in God. He like sort of is constantly thinking, his entire life's work is dedicated to this existential question, like, what are we doing here? But he does believe this. He says, whether our time on earth is several hours long or several years, it makes no difference if we lose eternity, right? Like, if you have no eternity, if there is nothing outside of this life, there's not a big difference between if you live 50 years or 70 years, right? In the grand scheme of things, that's nothing, right? If somebody says you can have an unlimited amount of money, or you can have $50,000, you're going to be like, okay, obviously I know which one I'm picking, right? Like, this is the idea, that you're choosing between these two very large extremes, and one is basically nothing in the face of the other one. It is important to note that it is not just immortality that man needs. Mere duration of existence does not suffice to make that existence meaningful. If there were no God, existence still has no meaning. It is not just immortality that gives life meaning, but God. What does that mean? It simply means that, yes, let's say that there is eternity. If there is no God, eternity becomes a very, very daunting thing with, like, again, no point, right? We are trying to prove and to sort of sift out the idea and the belief that all of these things, our lives, have meaning and have purpose, right? And God makes eternity possible. But even if eternity was possible without God, what would be can you imagine doing the life you live now forever? Sounds awful. I'm not interested. Because there's a lot of like suffering and pain, and that's okay for right now, but the idea is that there is something much bigger, and grander, like a plan that is set in motion for us. But for now, all you need to know for the sake of argument is these two things go hand in hand, immortality and God. So let's talk about this lack of value in immortality without God. A lot of words on this slide. So the first thing on this slide is that without God, it makes no difference whether you are a saint or you are satanic, right? In the end, it all ends in the grave, and then intrinsically there is no difference about how you live your life here on earth, okay? Without immortality, let's just say, without God, in immortality, all things are permitted. Like, everything goes, right? Selfishness would be a virtue, right? Because if I'm going to live forever, or even if I'm going to just live right now and there's no God, I have no reason to like look out for other people. If, like, again, most animals live selfishly. They're like, I want to eat this today and I want to go here, and they don't have, you know, one partner that they selflessly like dedicate themselves to in marriage, except for like maybe one or two animals that do that. But for the most part, they're all just sort of like living to get through it. And that's what we're saying here, right? Marriage would be meaningless. And if we were using reason alone, the conclusion would not be morality, right? Like if I am a reasonable being and my thought process is to like serve myself first and foremost, selfishness is not the answer to that, right? It's not like it doesn't make sense for me to like live by this moral code if there is nothing directing me in that trajectory. So that brings us to number 2. If there were no God, there would be no objective standard of right and wrong, okay? Sartre says moral values are just expressions of personal taste and socio-biological evolution. Who is to judge values? And where did we get the concept of morality? So then moving on to 3, without an objective means like you can't argue with it, right? Subjective means like everybody kind of has their own opinion and it's fine. But I think objectively, people on earth would say murder is not good, right? And so that's an example of like an objective right that most people on earth agree with, right? But in this situation, without this objective right, all of our values are either cultural or personal, and everyone's judgment is subjective. So how do you know which values are right or wrong, right? And the book poses the question like this. I did not come up with this, but they're like, in this situation, in this scenario, okay, where there is no objective right and wrong, what's the difference between Hitler and Mother Teresa? If we have no way of saying all of us agree, I think everybody in this room would say very clearly a difference between Mother Teresa and Hitler, right? I would say most people outside of this room feel that way. I would say most people on the face of the earth would say there is a distinction between Mother Teresa and Hitler, right? But that idea that there is a distinction, that there is an objective thing that we all agree on, that one is good and one is bad, that comes from someplace. And if it doesn't, then why do we all share this belief, right? Number 4, to deny the goodness of something because it is forbidden by a law-giving God is perfectly intelligible, but to say it is wrong without the existence of God is not. Without God, who are you accountable to? Without God, the judge is either people or the culture, and all judgments are relative. Again, in a world with no God, there is no absolute right or wrong, and there is no judge to hold us accountable, right? Finally, consequently, war, crime, and evil cannot be called wrong in any absolute sense. Everything would be relative depending on your society, because again, there are no absolutes. People as a group would evolve into deciding what is right versus what is wrong, right? But I would say, yes, culturally and even personally, I think people's values change over time slightly, but we are still, for the most part, oriented to some things that are absolutely always wrong, right? And I think that idea, that absolute that they're talking about, that we all live with, that we understand the difference between Mother Teresa and Hitler, right? That is what we are talking about when we talk about God, that absolute, that judge that holds us accountable, whether we realize it or not, whether we're atheists or we're not. There is something that is kind of tethering us to this idea of right and wrong. So, let's talk about the idea that there is no ultimate purpose without immortality and God. So the last one was value, and now this one is purpose, okay? If at the end of one's life there is just death standing with open arms, then what is the full of life? All or nothing, no purpose. Again, without God, there is no purpose for the existence of the universe, and the universe is pointless. Number 2. Consequently, man would have no purpose for existence, right? So if I'm saying up top, God means the universe has no purpose, then everything inside the universe also has no purpose, including me and you. We are victims of environmental roulette. According to a psychologist following Freud, we all have heard of Freud, right? We are the result of our sexual tendencies. There are schools of thought that that's everything that drives us is through our sexual tendencies, right? And then we have sociological schools of thought that tell us all of our choices are simply because we've been conditioned to believe that freedom is an illusion, right? So what does that mean? I guess that means that over the course of time, all of us have kind of just been, the word conditioned is, I don't want to say like brainwashed, but we've all just kind of like been put in a maze that has been setting us on this path, right? Like somebody set up a road for us and we all just kind of happen to follow the same road. But nobody set up the road. It just, over the course of time, there was a road and it was there and we all were set up to follow it, right? This is what they're trying to say. That we all follow this course together because there is no real freedom, okay? Or a biologist like Francis Crick might say, man is just an electrochemical machine altered by genetic code, right? And we've talked extensively about genetic code. Don't make me go back there, okay? But we know that even that genetic code inside of you that drives you is so specific, right? It's hard for us to be like, okay, well, everything is nothing, and I am just the product of my genetics, which we've already proven is not just a coincidence, right? But even so, like, what a reductive way to look at ourselves, to look at our existence, right? To say, like, I am just a machine, I am a little MacBook Pro, and somebody programmed me this way. Not somebody, actually, nothing programmed me to be this way. And so that's how I operate on this very specific set of values as everybody else. We all run on the same software that nobody made, is basically what we're saying. It's a lot to, like, people say, like, it's really hard to believe in God. It's a lot to not believe in God, too. Like, it's a stretch to get there. So let's talk briefly about the problem of atheism. The fundamental problem with this school of thought is that it makes it impossible for a man to live consistently and happily within this worldview. If he lives consistently, right, doing the same thing over and over again, he will not be happy. And if he lives happily, he will not be consistent. There is a framework that we are going to talk about. And before we talk about this framework, it is necessary for us all to imagine a house. How many of you live in a one-story home? Or one-story anything? Condo, apartment? Okay. How many of you live in a two-story home? Wonderful. So, Brandon, what connects those two stories in your house? Perfect answer, thank you so much. So I want you all to imagine you are in a house that has two stories, right? There are stairs connecting them. And this is a model called The Modern Man by Francis Schaeffer. So on the first floor of that house is life without God, right? Everybody who lives on that first floor believes that there is no God. And as such, right, they do not believe that life has meaning or purpose. They believe that when they die and they go into the grave, and that is the end game, okay? Then you have the second story of the house. And this is where the concept of universal meaning and value lives, okay? So if you live in that first floor where there is no God, right? And you live with these ideas of atheism, and you find yourself unhappy, you cannot for any reason go upstairs into the part of the house that has meaning and purpose, because meaning and purpose is oriented towards the idea that there is a God, okay? It's a little complicated, but if you're following it, right, the idea, anytime an atheist starts to wonder, like, what is my purpose? What is the meaning of life? What is all of this for? You've already removed God from that situation, right? You have opted to live in a one-story home. There is no second story where you can have that grasp of, like, meaning and purpose and value, okay? Because that value does not exist without God. So the problem, there is no God, and life has no purpose and no meaning, and we'll all die. So the atheists are like, okay, wait, I actually don't agree with you that my life doesn't have any meaning or value just because I don't believe in God. So Sartre solves his life meaning problem by saying you can create meaning for your life. You, a human being, can go ahead and give your life whatever meaning you want it to, right? And Sartre specifically says, my life has meaning because I believe in Marxism. I don't know if any of you are familiar with, I'm sure some of you, I don't know what grade you learned this in school, so the younger folks, I'm not sure if this applies to you, but Marxism is like, I don't want to say it's communism, but it's similar to communism. I don't think they're identical, but yes, right? Like, he's like, I can dedicate my life to this belief system, which revolves around a dictator, but even it's just like such a, in my estimation, like it feels like a very shallow thing to like it's like the opposite of capitalism. It's like if I were like, I'm going to devote my life to capitalism. Okay, awesome. That is so, it doesn't go very far, right? Like it's so limited and it's not really a belief system, but they're like, you can believe in something. You can have a purpose, right? You can create meaning for yourself, okay? But it's very interesting that you can stand and say, the universe does not have meaning because you are mortal, because there is no God, right? But I, as a finite being that will end, right? We talked about this idea of significance. I can create meaning. Okay, you don't need to do that because God lives on that second floor where the meaning and the value lives, and all you have to do is believe that there is a God in order to achieve that value and that meaning, right? But the idea that as an atheist, I don't believe in God, and I have to create my own life's meaning is very hard to grasp onto when you've gone through that first step of looking at how insignificant your life is in the grand scheme of the universe, and how even the universe goes away. So, this is what Christianity teaches us, right? God exists, man is eternal, and resurrection is real, right? And so if we focus on these two, right? Christianity says God exists, so we can live happily and consistently. We have this very clear set of commands that we follow. We have a very clear set of morals and values in the way we live our life, and we do them consistently. And then the idea that man is immortal is what gives us ultimate significance, right? Like even if I am a perfect Christian, which none of us are, but let's just pretend there is a perfect Christian other than Christ, right? But somebody in this room is a perfect Christian. But there is no immortality, and you'll live your life as a perfect Christian and you'll die, and that will be the end of it. That also doesn't work, right? But we have these two beliefs, that we have ultimate significance and immortality, and that we live happily and consistently because God gives our life meaning. And so we also know that because God exists, our morals and values are rooted in the nature of God, right? We didn't get these from being conditioned by society. We're not conditioned by some sort of like biological need for anything on earth or any kind of DNA engineering that's inside of us, right? And then ultimately, because there is a God, these morals and values that are rooted deep inside of us, we are also held accountable for them, right? Finally, the book says, if these two options were absolutely equal, right? If you were kind of on the fence about both, like, it could go either way, like there might be a God or there might not be a God, any rational person would choose a life that has meaning and purpose over death, chance, and despair, right? If somebody was like, you might live forever or you might live 70 years, I think most people would be like, okay, I want to hear more about the I would live forever situation. And that's what Pascal's wager is, right? Have any of you ever heard of this before? Pascal's wager? Yeah. Do you want to explain what it is? Nice and loud.
He kind of just talks about like if you believe in nothing in an afterlife, would you rather believe in something that's rather than nothing?
Yeah.
You kind of hope that there's a future,
Mm-hmm.
even if you think it's absurd.
Yes.
Like thinking that there is an afterlife is better than thinking there is no life.
Yeah. Perfect, right? Like if it's a 50-50 toss-up, and there's nothing to lose and infinity to gain, I don't know why you would go with nothing, right? Thank you, Monica. Mary, do you know what we just finished? We just finished level 1. Give yourselves a pat on the back. Unfortunately, we still are going to start level 2 tonight, so don't pat too hard because we got to keep going. So level 2 is, okay, let's just say there is a God. Is it the God of the Christians? So, is it the God of the Christians, or is it another God? Together, we're going to take a logical approach to argue the success of the sect. Yes, we're going to call Christianity a sect, because that's what the book calls it. Again, we're trying to be as unbiased as possible. So, from here, moving forward, I'm going to call it a sect, okay? And this sect follows, bare bones explanation, a crucified man named Jesus, who we already proved existed, like not as God, but we just said like, this is a guy, we found him, he's in history books, we know about him, we found his shroud, all this stuff, right? And so we know that this idea, like that these people, the people in this room actually, follow a man who was crucified on the cross and was killed and died and rose again, right? That the idea that people would continue to follow him after his death, the probability is near zero. It is almost impossible, okay? The idea that Christianity would succeed in the face of everything we're about to talk about is really, really low. And yet, we're all here thousands of years later. So there are going to be times in level 2 when we use Scripture, but we are not using Scripture to prove anything theological. I'm never going to go to somebody and say, I believe in God because the Bible here says that I should, right? Instead, we're using it as like, this is what Christians believe, and it says so here in this Bible that they read, and this is like what they're saying in terms of their social values, right? Not their theological values, but their social values are used at this level in order to determine like whether or not this is the book calls it an attractive sect, right? Like they're like some sects or religions are really attractive because they offer people this or that, right? But when we're looking at Christianity, at face value, not super attractive. Does anybody remember that Lucian quote that I was obsessed with last week from the Greek satirist who was like, they give away all their stuff and they let people take advantage of them, like making fun of how Christians live their lives, right? And so, you know, if somebody tells you like, give up everything you have and follow me, and, you know, if somebody slaps you on the cheek, give them the other one, like that is not something that people are like, sounds like a good time right off the bat, you know? We'll also compare it to another sect. And the one we'll use specifically in the book is Mormonism, not for any specific reason other than the book views it as a more favorable or attractive sect compared to Christianity. But it says you can really do this comparative analysis with any other religion. The book just doesn't go into all of them because we're already on week 4 of apologetics and we're still on we just finished level 1. So let's talk about the message of Christianity. I think I skipped a slide, sorry. And why Christianity prevailed against all odds, right? So one, we'll talk about the message of Christianity. What does Christianity teach us? And is it something that you think a lot of people would be into? Number 2, the methodology of spreading the message, right? So how are they spreading the gospel or the word that they believe? Number 3, the small number of believers at the start, which we know to be 82 disciples and apostles combined, right? So it's not like there are a bajillion people right out the gate. It's a pretty small group of people who are like, let's go out and tell people about Christ. And then finally, the final point for why Christianity should really not have survived is that all 82 of those people were killed because of what they believed. And like killed in very public, well-documented ways that people should look at and say, okay, I don't want to end up like them, right? So, I'm sorry I keep hitting the microphone, but I think it's okay because I see some of you falling asleep and I think it's helped keeping you guys awake. So, the message of Christianity, don't agree with me. The message of Christianity against all odds. So, the idea is that God became man out of love. He was crucified and rose from the dead and ascended back to heaven. Which, have you ever tried to talk to one of your friends about God and they're like, okay, that's a large pill for me to swallow, that you believe that this man died and rose from the dead and now you're going to live forever and go to heaven with him. So the message is difficult to accept, right? Even St. Paul calls the gospel foolishness to those who kind of like listen to it with the wrong ear, okay? But from historical accounts, we know that those who followed this message behaved very differently in the following aspects. So their view on life and its purpose is very clear. They all share this. Their view on the importance of loving everybody is really, really important to this group of Christians. They have contempt of worldly possessions, and their contempt of death, and and to love those who tortured them. Again, I have to remind you all that you cannot copy and paste anything from the book, so I'm basically retyping the entire book. You'll have to forgive me for all the typos. So the last one is their contempt of death, and the fact that they loved the people who tortured them, right? Just like Christ on the cross, saying, forgive them, they know not what they've done. All of the apostles acted in the same way. Are you okay? Okay. So, the method of spreading the message. Okay. So, there are 3 ways to spread a message to get people to follow it. Okay, so the first one is secretly with deceit, right? I can lie to people, I can tell them, hey, do you want to join my cult? I'll give you $1 million if you just do this, this, and this, right? So there is that way, right? You could trick people into coming over to your side. The second one is with power and compulsion, right? We know through history that lots of places were one religion, and then there was a war, and people came in and killed a bunch of people, and that place is now a completely different religion predominantly, because there was the use of power and compulsion to spread that message. And then there's the final one, which doesn't seem like it would get you very far, but it just to be open and to really believe what you're saying with conviction, and then being willing to tolerate whatever happens to you, which, if it doesn't sound familiar, this is the path that the apostles took and the path that we should all be taking even now. So here is the caveat about this third option, right? If you do it, there is no political correctness, especially at the time of the apostles. If you spoke freely about Christ at that time in history, you had religious opponents who were the Jewish people, and the political opponents who were the Roman Empire, and eventually the Roman Empire also became a fierce religious opponent as well. But the idea is like this was like a big no-no to go out and talk about Christ, right? So they're being open and honest, knowing that, second bullet, the punishment is either severe torture, imprisonment, or death. And at that time, they could not sue for any of those, which I didn't think they could, but the book felt it was important to mention, so I'm letting you know. If you get killed for preaching about Christ, there's really nothing you can do about it. So there were other invented religions right after Christ. Both of these men were named Judas. There is Judas Thaddeus, and then there's Judas of Galilee. And both of these men I think they were like, okay, I could do that. Where they saw that Jesus was very successful and like charismatic and good at talking to people and performed miracles. I don't know that these men performed miracles, but it is documented specifically in our friend Josephus's book, Antiquities. It's in the 20th volume, chapter 5, where he talks about these men, and he says they had lots of followers. He says the first one had about 400, and eventually he was killed because you're really not supposed to go around saying you're God. And immediately after he was killed, all of his followers dispersed. They gave up. They were like, you know what? Not worth it. Let's go home. And then Judas of Galilee, same concept, had a lot of followers, and eventually died, and everybody was like, well, that was nice while it lasted. I'm ready to move on to something else. And these accounts in history through Josephus, I'm going to try to get away from the mic a little bit. I can hear the feedback, and I do apologize. These accounts from Josephus actually coincide with the book of Acts, chapter 5, verses 38 through 42, which says, this counsels of men and will come to nothing, but if it is of God, you cannot overthrow it, because we cannot fight against God, right? Does that make sense? Are you picking up what I'm putting down, Martin? Okay, right? So he's saying that if this is from God, there's nothing people can do about it. But we're not really too worried about things that people make up, because it kind of all just goes away on its own, right? God doesn't let anything get too out of control and go far afield. Cool? Cool. So, the next point that we've discussed is that it is a very small group to start, right? We said it was 82 disciples and apostles, plus like a few extra believers. But these odds are statistically pretty bad that 82 people would go out and share information, and we would all be sitting here in churches all over the world 2,000 years later talking about that same message that these 82 people held true in the very beginning. As we mentioned, right, we said this is how Christianity is spread. They spoke openly. They did not have any power, right? We know that all of these people gave up. Even if they had like a little bit of power, God was like, Jesus said, leave it at home. Come with me, right? These people had nothing. And they weren't allowed to use deceit, and they weren't allowed to raise money, and they weren't allowed to like break up families, right? Everything they did it with like love. And if anything, they were going around being like, I don't have anything to give you except this gospel of Christ, like this, your salvation. And they also had no punishment for people who didn't believe, right? It was like a very open door policy. You can come, or we'll leave it alone. So it's very like, if you think about it, it's like, okay, these are 82 people. You don't think the Roman Empire could have just killed them and like been done with it, right? But they did kill them, and they weren't done with it, right? Like this idea that it should have been really easy to control 82 people, and they couldn't, is what fascinates us. And how come when they were murdered, the other people who saw them get murdered didn't say, oh, I don't want to end up like him, right? Instead they said, I'm okay if that's me. I'm going to go out and finish what he started because I believe so strongly in what I am preaching to people. And, even if they were like, okay, we're going to keep preaching, but we'll at least fight back. We'll bring our swords with us. No, like they're very, very specific in their conviction of what they are doing. Our book goes into great detail about like the leaders of the sect of Christianity. It talks about Peter, who really just calls for people to be pure of heart and be holy because I am holy, and to really, really like live honestly in every aspect of life. Then you have Paul, who used to be like a very like noble regard. Like people really like, he was a big deal until he wasn't, because he became a Christian. And he lost his status due to following the crucified. And we know that when Paul started, he was like he was on the other side, right? He was like fiercely against the church, and then later goes on to die for that same church, right? So I would recommend you go into your book and read this section, because again, I think it's important to like look at these people who suffered these tribulations, and say, okay, these are the people who, you know them, right? Created this church and then later suffered in peril and were killed, and we carry their legacy even now. Finally, we've talked about it a little bit, but all 82 of the people who we use to spread this gospel, to spread this message in the beginning, are publicly murdered or martyred, and yet people are not giving up, right? The leaders of the sect are targeted, and Josephus in Antiquities again makes note of James, Jesus' cousin, being killed. He also, this is not correlated to this specific study, but it is important to us that Josephus makes note of John the Baptist being killed, and we use that as like sort of, again, cross-referencing for credibility, right? Like that Josephus is talking about the same thing the Bible talks about in multiple areas. And then we know that multiple sources note that the followers of this sect welcomed martyrdom, right? And they witnessed even when and where it was punishable by death, right? There was no place they were like, we should probably skip this town because I've heard a lot of bad things about how they treat Christians. No, they were like, okay, well, we have to go there and we have to tell people about Christ. So again, if we're examining the counterintuitive nature of this sect, is they have no riches, no gain of power, land or earthly pleasure, they're tortured, they preach love and peace, and they don't fight back or defend themselves, and the God whom they're preaching does not come down from heaven and save them from death, even though they die for him, right? So I guess my question to all of you is, why is anyone following this faith, right? Like if you're looking at it on paper, this would not be for me, right? Like if I have if I'm living back then and I'm seeing this happen, there has to be something that compels me, right, to do all of this. I have to be so convicted. I have to really believe that this is the truth. So if I have any doubt, I'm not going to die for this thing, right? If I think this is a lie, I'm not going to go out and die for this thing, right? In other sects, people die while exploiting themselves or fighting to the death, and they're dying for something they believe is true, right? Like, that's a good counter argument. There are lots of religions where people might die for what they believe. However, our religion is also different in that we have no hate towards anyone who kills us, right? Which is something that is perfected in Christ, right? That we love everyone, even those who hurt us. And we go to those places where people don't want us, and we're willing to be killed, not to kill, but to be killed, right? Because we believe this. I think that's the thing that really like divides us, is like, it's not just that I'm willing to die for this message, but I'm willing to die delivering this message to you. That's how much I believe it, right? That's, I would say, the fundamental difference. People die for what they believe sometimes, yes, but this is not me going to the fire and saying, like, I want to kill anyone who doesn't believe what I believe. It's, I love you so much that I would die because I want you to have this gift that I have, right? Next week, yes, we're coming to the end, we will look at how Christian teachings do not offer any threat to social, economical, or legal fabric of society. More specifically, we're going to talk about how there was really like no negative impact on the Roman society. Oh, yes, hi.
What do you mean by that? Like on the second point?
Yes.
Or the second paragraph? What
Yeah.
do you mean by that? I don't understand it.
Amazing. Let's talk about it. So, do you want to, could you read it for us, Martin? Could you read it for us?
However, at no point did they hate those who killed them. They acted as model citizens that never instigated destruction in society that was punishable, even in prison.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Martin. So I guess what we're talking about in this second bullet point, right, goes with the first bullet point, right? Like the idea that I am willing to, that I believe in this thing so much, right, that I'm willing to die for it, is not necessarily like only Christianity. There are people who die for stuff more than just in Christianity, right? Would you agree? Like, I think the book uses the example of like, there are people who will like blow themselves up in the name of what they believe and kill other people in the process because they're like, I believe so strongly that everybody here should also believe, and I'm going to like fight a war, or I'm going to carry out an act of violence to prove what I believe. Does that make sense? So that's the first part, right? The part now that we are answering with is that I believe in this thing, and I am willing to go to death and be killed in order to prove that I believe it, right? I believe in this truth so much that I'm not coming to kill you because you don't believe. I'm coming to let you kill me because I believe so much that I would rather die than not deliver this message to you, than not share this truth with you, than not share the love of Christ with you. Does that make sense? So that's the distinction. Yes, people can die for what they believe, but Christians specifically are willing to die in order to service others with the gift of Christ, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like all the martyrs, like Saint George, for example, when they were, torturing him and then he was martyred at the end. See how many from the people that was watching him, how many believed. So by him going to death, he gave that message and other people believed.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, that's a great example. I need more practical examples, you're right. But that's a very good one. I appreciate the question, and I appreciate the explanation. Does anybody else have any other questions? I hope not, because Abuna is not with us today, so. Okay, sounds like there are no questions. You have your slides and your books. This goes up to about page 35, I think, in the book. 33? Okay, 33 in the book. Thank you.
So I have a question for you, especially for the young ones. Where is the number 82 coming from? Good. Were all of them, as far as we know, martyred?
Yes.
For the 12. Let's start with the 12. All of them were martyred? No. Yeah.
I say, I have a problem, because I
It's
also.
the curriculum.
No,
You're
I was going
good.
to say, I did not understand this. Do you know why the curriculum says they were all martyred if
It's probably they were all tortured, you
Yeah.
know, and have gone through a lot, and that by itself is considered martyrdom, right? So, yes, not that 12 of them were martyred. Who was not? Do you guys know?
John.
Saint John, the beloved, was not. And for the 70 apostles, we don't know most of them were martyred or not. I mean, we don't have full story for their lives to tell us what were the end of them. We know the most popular, yes, most of them were, but we don't know everything. So we are not 100% sure of that thing. As Mariam was saying about martyrdom, I mean, people who witnessed by sacrificing their own life, we're going to see very interesting stuff when we go to heaven. We're going to see somebody like Saint George. Who was torturing Saint George? Do you guys remember?
I don't know his name.
You don't know his name? Diocletius? Okay. Well, not that one specifically, but some of them, like Saint Damiana, somebody else was torturing her called Ananias. That man, at the end, after all what he's done and after all the martyrs that he killed, at the end he believed. So him and he was torturing Saint Damiana herself. So in heaven, after she offered her life, she sacrificed her life, they will be in heaven together saying, yeah, مع بعضهم, yeah. So, it's, yeah. طيب, we still have like 2 more times, apologetics.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to do a review with the last lesson. but-
That's good.
But
Maybe
it
a
might
small
be a
quiz.
separate review.
Maybe a small quiz or
Because
something.
Abuna wanted to do like a lesson in review, but I don't want to do 3 more
That's okay.
weeks. So we'll try our best to condense.
Maybe a quiz too, like highlights,
Oh,
yeah. Right? Yeah.
Is the quiz like an individual quiz or like we're doing
No,
it as a group?
Whatever you guys want. Individual.
Mario.
Mario. We're gonna all work on it together. We're gonna let Mario sit by himself and. Huh? Sure.
We're better in groups. It'll be good for us to highlight them, or at least that we.
I mean, yeah, whoever wants to do it on your own, you're good. You're good to go.
Instead of multiple choice.
Well, I think the format of the exam is multiple choices,
That's what
right?
it says online.
So that's easy. I mean, it's not essay questions or stuff like that. Okay.
And they don't provide any sort of like study guide exams we could.
For the exam? I don't think so.
So we have to make up the exam.
I can ask. I mean, I'm in a group.
I mean,
who's
this
saying-
curriculum is going away anyways, right?
No. Apparently, just the New Testament, they just changed the New Testament module. And we're checking if we're going to stick to the old one or the newer one. We're trying to figure out which one is easier. So we're still deciding. Okay? Let's pray. In the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, one God, Amen. We thank you, Lord, for everything, concerning everything and in everything. We thank you for the grace in which we stand. We thank you for the blessing that we were born in a church. We know you. We believe in you. We have faith in you. Please, our Lord, open our hearts and minds to your word. Please let us be representative, be ambassadors for you in front of others, not just through words, but through our actions. Through the intercession of Holy Virgin Mary, Archangel Michael, please be with us in all what we do, in our studies, in our schools, at work, and at home, with everyone we come in touch with every day. Hear us when we say thankfully, Our Father who art in heaven. See you guys next week. I like it here in the small church. More cozy, yeah. Nicer than the big one. We're lost in the church, yeah.